Welcome to Tales from the Trenches, Season 4. Today, it is my honor to have fellow Canadian Mike Duerksen with us.
Here's a story of a fundraiser who was launching his very own web show. Each episode is very short due to edits, so it can really flow. Here's a story of a podcast guest star who was busy raising money of their own. They were each great in their own way, fundraising in his own. Till the one day when Jack asked a guest to join him, and they knew it was much more than a jest, that these guests must somehow form a resource. That's the way they all became the podcast guests. The podcast guests. The podcast guests. That's the way they became the podcast guests.
Mike is the founder of BuildGood, a fundraising growth agency that helps nonprofits in Canada and the U.S. increase revenue from new and existing donors, with a special focus on improving the lifetime values from first-time giver to legacy leaver. He's also the host of the top-rated nonprofit podcast, the BuildGood Fundraising Podcast, and convener of the BuildGood Summit in Toronto, a 2-day showcase of fundraising innovation and inspiration that brings together 300-plus fundraising leaders. His most important job is husband and dad to 3 kids. Outside of work, he loves spending time at the cabin with his family and reading biographies.
Oh, thanks for having me, Jack. Good to be here.
So many fundraising professionals really didn't start their career in fundraising. Often they kind of fell into it or did it off the side of their desk. How did you get your start?
So I grew up in South America where both of my parents were actually nonprofit workers. Now, they weren't on the fundraising side. My mom was a nurse from Switzerland who did their equivalent of kind of like a Peace Corps program, and she ended up in South America as a nurse. And my dad was the son of a refugee family who had ended up down there, and so that was, he had grown up there, but he was working with small scale farmers at a social enterprise nonprofit. So they were teaching farmers how to grow crops and then eventually take them to market. And so I was always surrounded by that kind of work. They both ended up working for a different organization that focused on helping youth who were homeless. And so I kind of grew up around it. And when I was going to university and didn't want to go to university anymore, I took a leap year and I ended up working for a nonprofit in Germany. And that's where I was first introduced to the fundraising side of things. And I was working as a gift in kind coordinator. They had me driving around a big Sprinter van, picking up used hospital equipment that we then put in containers, and it went over to Afghanistan and other places. So
Wow.
When I came back and finished my degree in communications, my first job ended up being in marketing, and I kind of at that time I thought fundraising was a bit of a dirty word, to be honest. I was like, man, if we just tell good stories, like the rest will just fall into place. And I asked the CEO of that organization, I would love to work for you. I would love to have this position that you're offering me, but I want to report to you. I don't want to report to the fundraising director. The hubris of like a novice, right?
Right.
And in the end, I ended up loving fundraising, and it's always been that.
So it's interesting. You have a very unique background, but how was philanthropy spoken about around your dinner table when you were growing up?
So I grew up in a family where faith played an important role, and so philanthropy in that faith tradition was really baked into how my parents talked about it and how they taught us. When I was, maybe I was 8 or 9, I really wanted a BB gun, and my parents were pacifists, and they're like, "Here's the deal: First of all, you got to pay for it yourself. So you got to find a way to get this money. Second of all, however much that BB gun costs, you've got to take at least that much money or more, and also like make a charitable gift somewhere, or buy something for like a charitable sort of organization. So this is going to cost you 2 to 3 times what it would cost you if you just went and bought this BB gun at the store. And so we did, and I ended up saving the money. I bought it a bunch of toys. We took it to like a local orphanage that ended up getting that, and so they were always doing things like that, really involving us in philanthropy, and also involving us in their work, to be quite frank. And so I remember Christmas dinners, we would go. They worked at this orphanage, and we would go. And my dad really felt compelled. He was the CEO of the organization. He really felt compelled to be there at Christmas. And so oftentimes Christmas evening, we were like there, right? Instead of having it at home. And it was a wonderful way to grow up. And my parents did a great job instilling good values in us. And I think having a really balanced view of the world.
That is unbelievable. That story about the BB gun and actually setting aside the same amount for charity, like that will stick with me. It's amazing. So how now flipping it then, how do you talk about philanthropy with your 3 kids?
Yeah, our kids are still pretty young. Our oldest is certainly in a position where she can understand the giving of money, like the making charitable gifts. And so we do involve her in those decisions. We most often talk about it when you're at a red light and maybe there's a person experiencing homelessness and they're asking for money, or you're walking downtown and somebody's, leaned up against a building with a sign or something. Those are the moments that we most often talk about it. And sometimes we give and sometimes we don't. And we have those conversations with our children of like, these are very personal decisions. And if it was up to them, they would, in that moment, they're like, "Oh, let's invite them home. Let's give them a house. Let's do all the things." Yeah. And yeah, we try hard to involve them in our financial decisions as well. Just so they understand this is how we make financial decisions, and giving is a financial decision, and it's also a decision about values and the kind of world that we want to see them grow up in, but also like as a way to think about self and selflessness that's baked into that too, right? So,
yeah, wow, that's very, very thoughtful. You and I kind of, I was reading your bio and reading some of the things that you've done, and we tend to sing from the same hymnal. So hopefully it's not going to be too much of an echo chamber, but that's okay. I've often said that fundraising is not sales. It's different, right? If your cell phone dies, you need a new one. You can decide on whether it's an iPhone or an Android or a new one or an older one. No one needs to give to charity other than those that have kind of those self-imposed rules like tithing and things like that. So talk to me a little bit about that whole concept that, fundraising is sales. And I don't think anyone needs to give. And it drives me crazy. My biggest pet peeve is getting those emails in December saying, there's only a couple of days left in the month to give your gift. And I'm like, I don't care. Are you telling me you aren't going to accept my gift in January? Like that's the most arbitrary, stupid thing I've ever heard of. I don't need, 20 charities tell me when December 31st is. So talk to me a little bit about that whole fundraising sales mentality.
Yeah, I think there's a lot we can learn from the commercial world, but I don't think there's a whole lot we can copy from the commercial world. And so that's an important distinction that I want to start off with. So let's start here with fundraising is sales. I generally tend to agree with you. I do think that the best, like the way that sales is maybe best defined is actually like helping somebody else make a good decision. It is not the way that most of us encounter sales. Right? Most of the time we think of sales as being somebody who's trying to persuade you to buy their product, whether the product is good or not, because they're incentivized to do so. And as fundraisers, I don't think we can persuade anybody to make a gift to our organization. I don't think we're in the business of persuasion. We're in the business of connection, right? And so if we're approaching it from a sales-led sort of lens of like, if I'm persuasive enough, if I'm loud enough, if I can get enough attention, if I can just find the right angle, if I can find these growth hacks, if I can, all these things that come from the world of sales, we probably, I would argue, aren't going to be as successful at building a long-term, committed, broad base of donors, of people who feel like they're an important part of the team. Some of those tactics, those pressure tactics that come from the sales world, and I've studied them all because I'm direct response fundraiser who studies direct response, like commercial direct response. Some of them can work. A lot of them do work in the short term. A lot of them don't work in a sustained long term. So you might get a gift. You may not get a second, third, or fourth gift. You may not get somebody who might feel connected to your organization, trust your organization, might be moved to making the monthly gift or increase their giving or give year after year, or even leave you a gift in their will. So those sales pressure tactics often tend to work in acquisition to get a first-time donor, but it's the wrong motivation. That gift is often triggered by a sense of urgency or by a fake matching gift. It's not necessarily triggered by, connection and alignment with cause and deep personal meaning. So you always have to balance those things out a little bit. Now, there's plenty of research, including from Dr. Russell James, which is that when we're making a purchasing decision, a completely different part of the brain lights up than when we're making a charitable decision. Those are actually two separate processes in our brain. Dr. Russell James put people in like an fMRI machine and like asked them questions about charitable giving. And we know that when we're making charitable decisions and we're giving money away, the part of the brain that is most activated is the part of the brain that is responsible for relationships. It's the familial part of the brain. It's the part of the brain that we activate when we're thinking about love and friends and family. And it's the part of the brain that is responsible for the story of self. So giving is much more of an autobiographical decision than purchasing something, which is often a decision around meeting some sort of physical need. Sneakers, clothes, going to a movie, whatever. Whereas giving to charity is often about who am I? What kind of person am I? What are my values? How do I want to be perceived? Who do I want to be? Sometimes it's who do I want to become? Sometimes it's who do I want my children to become? And so those are just two completely different decisions that then, of course, require two completely different approaches.
Well, Mike, this has been absolutely amazingly interesting. You certainly have the direct mail market, very, very well thought out. And I think that many of our listeners will really, really appreciate connecting. So if folks wanted to connect with you, how would they do that?
If they're podcast listeners, because they're listening to your podcast, they can find the BuildGood fundraising podcast, which is very focused on building a broad base of donors. We don't really get into major gifts. They can find me on LinkedIn. I try to be pretty active, so just look for Mike Duerksen, or they can go to buildgood.com, and there's all the information there.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Jack. I'm glad we were able to find time for this.